Welcome to the channel where we bring you the most gripping and inspiring stories of resilience, determination, and survival. If you're someone who loves a good story of humans battling against impossible odds, you're in the right place. Today, we've got a tale that will keep you at the edge of your seat. It's a story where humanity faces a terrifying enemy, zombies, and yet, against all odds, they stand tall, fighting to survive. This fight isn't just for survival. It's for everything they hold dear, their future, and their humanity. Before we dive into this thrilling story, make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell icon, so you never miss an exciting, adrenaline-pumping tale like this. Now, grab your seat and prepare for a wild ride. This is a battle you won't forget. Let's get started. The world had changed overnight. What was once a thriving society of technology, commerce, and innovation had crumbled under the weight of a sudden and brutal apocalypse. Zombies, once mere creatures of fiction, had become a deadly reality. Their insatiable hunger for human flesh spread like wildfire, leaving only a few pockets of humanity struggling to survive. In the heart of a decimated city, a small group of survivors had formed a tenuous alliance. They weren't the strongest, nor the most skilled, but they had something that the zombies couldn't take away: hope. Led by a former soldier named Jack, the group had taken refuge in a once bustling apartment complex. The tall building, now partially gutted and covered in the remnants of previous battles, was their last stronghold. They knew that if they could hold the building, they could survive another day. Jack stood at the top of the stairs, staring out of the shattered windows. Below, the streets were teeming with the undead. Every so often, a loud scream echoed through the air as another unfortunate soul met their gruesome fate. The group's resources were dwindling. Food was scarce, ammunition was running low, and their morale was at an all-time low. But Jack refused to give in to despair. He knew that survival wasn't just about food and weapons, it was about the will to keep fighting. "There's no way we can hold out much longer," Sarah, one of the group's youngest members, said as she paced nervously behind him. "The zombies are getting smarter. They're learning how to break through our defenses." Jack turned to face her, his face grim but resolute. "We've been through worse, Sarah. We can't give up now. We just need a plan, a way to fight back." As Jack spoke, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway behind them. It was Max, a former firefighter who had become their makeshift medic. He looked exhausted, his clothes stained with sweat and dirt. "We need to talk," Max said, his voice low and serious. The three of them huddled in a corner of the room, away from the others, who were gathered around a small fire trying to stay warm. Max glanced around before speaking again. "There's a way out," he said, his eyes flickering with a mix of fear and determination. "I found an old map in the building's office. It shows a tunnel that leads to the outskirts of the city. If we can get to it, we might have a chance to escape." Jack's mind raced as he considered the possibility. "But the zombies will be everywhere. Even if we can make it to the tunnel, there's no guarantee we'll survive." "We have to try," Max insisted. "We don't have many options left." Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. He had seen too many of his friends fall to the zombies. The thought of leaving behind their home, their only safe haven, was almost unbearable. But Max was right. They couldn't stay there forever. "All right," Jack said, his voice steady. "We'll make a run for it. But we do this together. No one gets left behind." The group gathered in the main room, each member looking nervous but resolute. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would make their way through the building, avoid the zombies in the streets, and reach the tunnel entrance. Once they were in the tunnel, they would head to the outskirts, where they might find a safe place to regroup. Jack's heart pounded as he looked around at the faces of the people who had become his family. They had all lost something in this hellish new world, but they had also found strength in each other. The bond they shared was their greatest weapon. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for each other. As the group moved cautiously through the dark hallways of the building, the tension was palpable. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant groan of a zombie, sent a wave of fear through them. They moved slowly, avoiding the open windows and the streets below. The closer they got to the tunnel entrance, the more the air seemed to thicken with dread. There was no turning back now. They had made their choice. The group moved through the shadowy halls, the dim light from their flickering flashlights casting eerie shadows against the walls. The silence was broken only by the occasional creak of the building structure and the distant groans of the zombies outside. Every corner, every step, felt like a potential death sentence. Yet, they pressed on, determined to make it to the tunnel. Jack led the way, his military instincts guiding his every move. He'd been through combat before, but this was different. This wasn't a war against human enemies, it was a battle for survival against a relentless, mindless horde. Zombies didn't negotiate, didn't feel fear. They were an unstoppable force, and the group's only hope lay in their ability to outwit them. Sarah stayed close behind Jack, her eyes darting nervously at every sound. She wasn't used to this kind of fighting. Her life before the apocalypse had been simple, filled with school, friends, and plans for the future. Now, survival was the only thing that mattered. "We're almost there, right?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Just stay focused," Jack replied, not looking back. "We need to stick to the plan. Don't get distracted." Max, bringing up the rear, kept a watchful eye on the group. He knew the dangers of being the last in line, but he also knew that he could provide medical help if any of them got injured. The last thing they needed was a wounded person slowing them down. His heart was heavy as he thought about the toll this journey was taking on all of them. They were no longer the strong, vibrant people they had once been. The stress, fear, and constant danger had worn them down. But they couldn't give in. Not now. As they approached the stairwell leading to the lower levels, Jack signaled for everyone to halt. He motioned for Sarah and Max to stay quiet as he carefully peered around the corner. The hallway below was dark, but Jack could hear the unmistakable shuffle of zombie feet. There was a group of them, at least 5 or 6, wandering aimlessly through the building. Jack cursed under his breath. They couldn't afford to fight. They had to get past them without being seen. "Listen up," Jack whispered, his voice sharp. "We're going to move quickly. Stick to the walls and avoid making noise. If they see us, we run. Don't fight unless you have no choice." Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with fear but determination. Max didn't say anything, but his grim expression spoke volumes. They all knew that they had one shot at this. If they failed, there would be no second chance. They began to move, each step deliberate and cautious. Jack led the way, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings for danger. They reached the first set of stairs without incident, but as they descended into the lower levels of the building, the sound of shuffling feet grew louder. The zombies were getting closer. "Wait," Jack whispered urgently. He motioned for the group to stop and crouch down. The shadows cast by their flashlights were barely enough to illuminate the dark stairwell, but they could hear the unmistakable sound of the zombies sniffing the air, searching for prey. The creatures were right below them now, and the tension in the air was thick. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she gripped the handle of the knife she had been carrying for days. It was small but sharp, her only means of defense should the zombies close in. Her fingers were trembling, but she forced herself to steady her breath. She had to stay calm. Max's eyes flickered nervously toward the others, his medical training kicking in as he searched for an escape route in case things went south. He wasn't a fighter, but he would do whatever it took to protect his friends. Jack's mind raced as he considered their next move. They had no room for error. If they tried to rush past the zombies, they'd be risking everything. But if they stayed too long, they would attract more attention. He glanced at Sarah and Max, signaling them to stay silent and still. They could hear the zombies getting closer. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the building. It wasn't a zombie, but the sound of something heavy falling to the floor. The group froze. The zombies were distracted for the moment, turning toward the noise. Jack seized the opportunity. "Go," he hissed. They bolted down the stairs, moving as fast as they dared without drawing attention. Jack led the way, Max and Sarah close behind. They reached the bottom of the stairwell, and just ahead, they could see the entrance to the tunnel, an old metal door, rusted and battered, but still intact. Their salvation was within reach. But just as they neared the door, a loud growl rang out from the stairwell behind them. The zombies had heard them. They weren't far behind. Jack grabbed the door handle, twisting it with all his strength. It wouldn't budge. His heart raced as panic set in. "It's locked," he shouted. Max quickly moved to his side, trying to force the door open. "We don't have time," he yelled. The sound of shuffling feet grew louder, closer. Sarah's breath was shallow as she glanced over her shoulder. The zombies were closing in fast. There was no time left. Jack turned to Max. "We have to break it down." Max nodded, pulling a crowbar from his pack. He jammed it into the doorframe and began to pry. The tension in the air was palpable. The zombies were nearly upon them. With a loud crack, the door finally gave way. Jack shoved it open, and the group rushed inside, slamming the door shut behind them. They were in the tunnel now, safe, for the moment. But the journey was far from over. The real test was just beginning.
The tunnel was damp and dark, the air thick with the musty scent of decay. The only light came from their flashlights, casting long, eerie shadows on the stone walls. Jack motioned for the group to stay close, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. They couldn't afford to make a sound that would attract attention. The tunnel might have been their escape route, but it was far from secure. They had no idea what lay ahead, and every turn could bring more danger. "We need to keep moving," Jack said quietly, his voice steady despite the nerves gnawing at him. "The farther we get, the better our chances of getting out of here." Max and Sarah nodded in unison. They all understood that time was running out. The zombies outside weren't going to stop searching for them, and the longer they stayed in one place, the more likely it was that the undead would find a way into the tunnel. Jack kept his eyes forward, his mind racing as he thought about their next move. As they ventured deeper into the tunnel, the path became increasingly treacherous. The ground was uneven, littered with debris, and the walls were covered in grime. The tunnel seemed to stretch on endlessly, with no sign of a way out. Jack had seen maps, but they didn't give much detail about the underground passage. It was possible they were walking right into a trap. "We've got to pick up the pace," Jack said, glancing over his shoulder. "Stay alert." Sarah, who had been walking in the middle of the group, faltered for a moment, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was exhausted, both physically and mentally. The last few days had taken their toll, and the constant fear of death was wearing her down. But she couldn't let herself stop now. She had made it this far, she couldn't let it all fall apart. She forced herself to keep up, pushing through the exhaustion, knowing that the only thing standing between her and certain death was her determination. Max noticed Sarah's struggle and moved closer to her. He offered a brief smile, a silent gesture of reassurance. "You're doing great," he said softly. "We'll make it. We have to." Sarah smiled weakly, grateful for his support. She wasn't sure she believed it, but she needed to hear it. She needed something to hold on to. The tunnel stretched on, the oppressive silence broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. But as they continued forward, Jack felt a growing sense of unease. There was something about this place, something wrong. The air was too still, the darkness too complete. He could hear nothing beyond their group, no sign of movement, no distant groans of zombies. It was as if the tunnel was waiting for them. "Does anyone else feel that?" Jack asked, his voice low. Max nodded, his brow furrowing. "Yeah. Something doesn't feel right. It's too quiet." Sarah's anxiety only grew as they walked deeper. She had heard stories about places like this, abandoned tunnels that became traps, places where people were lured in and never seen again. Was this one of those places? Were they walking into a death trap? "I think we should turn back," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "Maybe we missed another exit. Maybe we should go back up." "No," Jack said firmly, stopping in his tracks. He turned to face her, his eyes hard with resolve. "We're not going back. It's too dangerous up there. We keep moving forward." Max's face tightened in agreement. "He's right. There's nothing for us above ground anymore. We go back now, we're dead." Sarah bit her lip but nodded reluctantly. She knew they were right. She had no choice but to keep going. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they continued down the tunnel. They hadn't spoken much since the exchange, each of them lost in their thoughts. But just as the silence became unbearable, the ground beneath them suddenly trembled. It was a subtle shift at first, but then it grew stronger, the vibrations echoing through the tunnel. Jack's eyes widened. "Get ready," he hissed, his voice barely audible. "Something's coming." Max pulled out his crowbar, gripping it tightly as his eyes scanned the dark passage. Sarah's grip on her knife tightened, her heart pounding in her chest. The ground trembled again, followed by a low growl that sent a chill down their spines. The sound was unmistakable, zombies. But this wasn't just any group of zombies. There was something more ominous about this growl, something unnatural. Before Jack could give any orders, the tunnel ahead of them erupted in a deafening crash. The walls seemed to buckle, and a series of terrifying shapes emerged from the shadows, moving faster than any zombies they had encountered before. They were unlike the slow, mindless creatures the group had fought so far. These creatures were fast, and they were relentless. "Run!" Jack shouted, instinctively pulling Sarah and Max behind him. "We can't fight them." The three of them sprinted down the tunnel, their hearts racing. The sound of the creatures' snarls and footfalls echoed behind them, growing louder with every passing second. Jack's mind was in overdrive, calculating every move, every turn. They had to get out of here. They couldn't stop. Not for anything. Suddenly, the tunnel ahead opened up, revealing a small chamber. Jack didn't hesitate, he shoved the others into the room and slammed the door behind them. They were in a dead end. There was nowhere to go. Max's eyes widened as he realized what had just happened. "We're trapped," he whispered, his voice full of dread. But Jack wasn't ready to give up. "We'll find a way out," he said, his voice strong, despite the fear that gripped him. He looked around, trying to find anything that could help them escape. "We'll fight if we have to." As the creatures outside banged on the door, Jack knew that this would be the fight of their lives. They had made it this far, there was no way they were going down without a fight. But as the pounding grew louder, Jack realized that they were running out of time. They had to act, and fast. The fate of the group rested on their ability to survive this nightmarish encounter.
The door shook violently as the creatures outside slammed against it with a strength that sent reverberations through the chamber. The air was thick with tension as Jack, Sarah, and Max stood in the small room, their backs pressed against the walls. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity, and the sound of the creature's relentless pounding only added to the mounting pressure. "We can't keep this up much longer," Max said, his voice tight with anxiety. "That door won't hold forever." Jack scanned the room, his mind working overtime. There had to be something, anything, that could help them escape. The chamber they had taken refuge in was small, only a few meters wide, and the walls were lined with old pipes and broken machinery. But it wasn't enough. They needed a way out. "We'll have to make a run for it," Jack said, his voice steady despite the panic creeping up inside him. "We can't stay here. We need to get to the next section of the tunnel." Max looked at him, his face pale with fear. "Are you crazy? They're right outside the door." "We don't have a choice," Jack replied, his eyes hard with determination. "The longer we wait, the more likely it is that they'll break through. We fight our way out, or we're done." Sarah clenched her fists, her mind racing. She had been through so much already, so much loss, so much danger. But now, in this moment, there was no turning back. She looked at Jack and nodded. "Let's do it. We don't have any other options." Jack gave a sharp nod, his eyes flashing with resolve. He motioned for them to stay close as he quietly approached the door, his ears straining to listen for any signs of the creatures outside. The pounding was relentless, but there was a faint pause in the noise. "That's our chance," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. "When they stop, we move fast." The seconds felt like hours, but finally, the creatures seemed to lose interest in the door. The pounding ceased, and for a moment, there was only silence. Jack signaled to Sarah and Max, his hand trembling slightly. This was it. In one swift motion, Jack shoved open the door. The creatures, realizing they had been outsmarted, shrieked in fury. But it was too late. Jack, Sarah, and Max darted into the hallway, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. Their feet barely made a sound against the rough, stone floor, but the noise of the creatures' shrieks filled the tunnel, amplifying their fear. "Down the hall. Now!" Jack barked. He led the way, his heart pounding in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins. Every step was a gamble. Every corner could hide death. Max was right behind Jack, his breathing ragged. He glanced back, seeing the shadows of the creatures growing closer. They were gaining on them. "We're not going to outrun them," Max panted. "We don't have to outrun them," Jack said, his voice sharp. "We just need to get to the next section of the tunnel. It's our only shot." They rounded a corner, and the tunnel widened ahead of them. Jack's eyes darted around, looking for anything they could use to block the creatures. A few meters ahead, he saw a stack of old crates piled against the wall. It was the perfect opportunity. "Over there!" Jack yelled. "Use the crates!" The group ran towards the crates, throwing them aside as they quickly formed a barricade in the narrow passageway. The creatures were closing in, but the barricade would buy them a few precious moments. Jack grabbed a piece of metal piping from the debris and handed it to Max. "Take this," he said. "We'll need it if they get through." Max gripped the pipe tightly, nodding. Sarah, still shaking, clutched her knife. They weren't fighters, not in the traditional sense, but they had survived this far. They could make it through this too. The creatures slammed against the barricade, their feral shrieks echoing through the tunnel. It wasn't long before they began trying to claw their way through, but the pile of crates held for now. The pounding grew more frantic, and Jack knew they didn't have much time. "We need to move," Jack urged. "Now." Max hesitated. "What if we can't hold them off?" "We won't have to," Jack said grimly. "We just need to keep moving. The tunnel goes deeper, and we'll find another exit. Stay with me. We move fast. We don't stop." They pushed forward, moving through the now barren hallway. The tunnel was narrow and oppressive, and their breath echoed loudly in the silence. Every now and then, they would hear the creatures shrieking from behind, but they had put enough distance between themselves and the monsters to feel a brief sense of relief. The path stretched on, the air growing colder as they descended deeper into the bowels of the earth. The sound of their footsteps was the only thing that broke the silence now, but the constant fear of being hunted lingered in the back of their minds. It was Sarah who spotted it first, a faint light in the distance. "There," she whispered, her voice trembling with hope. "We're close. That's gotta be an exit." Jack's heart surged with hope. "Stay focused," he reminded them. "Keep moving." The light grew brighter as they approached, and soon they found themselves at the end of the tunnel. Before them was a small, hidden door, the remnants of a long-abandoned underground bunker. "This is it," Jack said, his voice full of relief. He pushed the door open, revealing a dimly lit chamber beyond. The air was stale, but it was a safe haven. They were out of the tunnel. As they stepped into the bunker, Jack felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. They had made it. They were alive. But their journey wasn't over. The world outside was still a wasteland, full of dangers they couldn't even begin to imagine. And though they had escaped the immediate threat, they knew that their fight was far from finished. There would be more challenges ahead. But for now, they had survived. And that, in itself, was a victory.